Welcome everyone to today's webinar, and I thank you all for taking time out of your busy days to spend time with us. Today is the second in the Program Operator Consortium Education Webinar Series, and we are really excited to have special guests Erin McDade and James Bogdan with us today to tell their unique stories and bring their perspectives to this broader initiative that we are all engaged in, which is to make products with less impact on the environment and to convey that information to the people that care. Today we're going to tell a story, and we're going to start with Erin, who will introduce herself, as will James, who's going to talk about the work they've done at Architecture 2030 to really visually make the case for us. Why do we need benchmarking goals? What's actually happening in the built environment, in the natural environment, and what's going to look like by 2030 and by 2050. James is then going to share with us the work that NRMCA has done to create an industry-wide EPD for their organization and the process they went through to create that and the results that they have today. You're going to see it's quite a lot of work and really brilliantly done. And then I'm going to talk about what we at the Program Operator Consortium have been working on for the last year and a half since we started to achieve the goals that we've set out to achieve, which will tee up Kim to introduce the latest tool that we've been developing, which is the benchmarking guidance, which will kick off the review period, and we'll wrap it up with Q&A. Now, you guys all have probably been on webinars before. You can put your questions into the question panel at any time. We'll keep an eye on that. Any questions we don't get to during the webinar, we'll follow up with you later. In the follow-up emails from this webinar, the link to the benchmarking guidance will be available because we're inviting everybody to comment. This webinar is being recorded and the deck will be made available as well, and it will all be posted on the Program Operator Consortium website. So a little bit about the Program Operator Consortium. We announced the convening of the consortium at Greenbuild in 2014, and initially there were 5 members. In the last year and a half, SCS Global and CSA Group have joined. Every program operator who has a governance document and is an operating program operator is welcome to join. We have some guidance about the criteria for joining, both if you're a program operator, as well as our new affiliate member program. Today, our affiliate members are ThinkStep, NRMCA, and Sustainable Solutions Corp. And we'll talk a little bit more at the end about the benefits and the guidance around the affiliate program. But we have all of these ways for people to participate because our goal at the end of the day is about aligning the industry and providing simpler, more standardized, and more useful solutions for reporting in this space. So last year we spent a lot of time developing our technical tools, and this year in 2017 our focus is on education and engagement. We are, again, striving to provide simpler, more standardized and useful solutions for environmental reporting. So everything that we do is really founded in the introduction to the ISO 14025 standard for creating Type 3 environmental declarations. This is right on the very first page and talks about the importance of harmonizing program instructions particularly between PCRs and between programs, so that things can be comparable, and talks about mutual recognition of rules with respect to developing PCRs, review and verification procedures, and all the administrative procedures. It also talks about being clear about the information needs of the people who are consuming this information, and to pay due attention to the level of awareness. So it's talking about how much information and how is it delivered so those people who need to consume it can actually consume it. So all of these things are top of mind. And so they result in this specific goal, which is to create Type 3 environmental declarations that do encourage the demand for and the supply of those products that really do cause less stress on the environment. And so we want to be able to provide that information in a way that delivers on this commitment, so that at the end of the day, the people who are making decisions about products can make informed decisions that now should be able to include comparative decisions, so that we are encouraging and creating preference for those products that truly are credibly higher performing. And we're going to get into what that means. So again, our high-level goals are to standardize how reporting is working, being able to provide improved reports to help specification decision makers. And we're able to do this by collaborating all of the members, both the program operator members and the affiliate members, coming together to collaborate and create these rules and tools so that things are easier to do, streamlined, and effective. And we have kind of ongoing research in the background trying to answer simple questions like, well, how much LCA content really should be required in an EPD? What are the challenges for manufacturers to deliver LCAs conformant with different programs? Difficulty for anybody doing LCAs, whether they're experts or novices. Difficulty for verifiers, because anywhere there's difficulty, there's cost. And finally, what content is useful to AEC professionals to make better informed decisions, how to use that information, and what is going on in this kind of larger goal of looking at the total environmental impact of a building, not just of its component parts. So to talk to us today about exactly that, what are AECs looking for, and what are the leaders in the industry, the think tanks, the folks who are really getting the data in front of us to say, this is what's happening, this is where we think it's going, and this is what needs to happen. And I want to introduce our guest from Architecture 2030. Take it away.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for being here today. My name is Erin McDade, and as Terry said, I'm with Architecture 2030. I'm a program manager. I've been with the organization for about 4 years. I'm a trained architect, and my studies and profession have really focused on high performance buildings, deep energy retrofits, building science, etc. And I'm really happy to be here talking to you guys today about embodied carbon. So for those of you who are not familiar with Architecture 2030, we're a nonprofit organization founded in the early 2000s. Our mission is to rapidly transform the built environment from being the world's biggest contributor of greenhouse gases to a central part of the solution to the climate change crisis. We were started by the world-renowned architect, educator, and author Edward Masria. He started Architecture 2030 as part of his architecture practice in the early 2000s and officially closed his practice to launch the organization as a nonprofit in 2006. And one of the first initiatives that came out of Architecture 2030 was the 2030 Challenge. The 2030 Challenge calls for an incremental reduction in the fossil fuel energy consumption of our new buildings, and started with an immediate 50% reduction and then is taking us out to carbon neutral by the year 2030 for new construction. And the 2030 challenge, upon launching, was immediately adopted by the American Institute of Architects, and within a couple years have been adopted by 70% of the top 20 architecture and engineering firms in the country, 52% of all architecture and engineering firms. It's been adopted by almost all professional organizations, as well as multiple state and local governments. And there have been even federal codes that have adopted 2030 challenge targets into their codes. In the time since 2006, the organization has done a lot. But some of the highlights are, in 2014, Edward and the organization developed the China Accord, and we worked with CEDAAB in China, which is a government organization. It stands for China Exploration and Design Association, the architecture branch. And so with that government organization, Architecture 2030 developed and launched the China Accord, where 52 international and Chinese firms signed on and committed to designing all of their new buildings, major renovations, and urban developments to be carbon neutral by the year 2050. You can see the list of the organizations that have signed on, and Edward signing the accord here. And this is significant because it's bringing a lot of our efforts to China, which is, along with the US, one of the biggest countries contributing to climate change and GHG emissions right now. And we have since hosted and developed multiple education workshops in China, educating designers there how to achieve zero net carbon design. Ed and Architecture 2030 also were one of the initiating organizations for the first ever Buildings Day at the Conference of Parties 21 in Paris in 2015, out of which the now famous Paris Climate Accord was developed. And maybe one of our lesser known challenges, but crucial for what we're talking about today, and probably one that you all are familiar with, is the 2030 Challenge for Products, which was launched in 2011. And similar to the original 2030 Challenge, the 2030 Challenge for Products calls for incremental reductions in the embodied carbon footprint of our building products, targeting a 50% reduction or better by the year 2030. So while we're going to be talking about that today, it's important to step back a little bit and look at the bigger global picture of where we are in terms of carbon emissions and where the built environment is headed. So as I mentioned, the Paris Climate Agreement that came out of COP21 in December of 2015 calls for the global community to keep our average temperature increases well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, and try to limit that increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is important because 2 degrees Celsius is widely accepted by the scientific community as the tipping point, after which our climate change will spin out of control and we'll no longer be able to reverse and mitigate the effects. So I'm going to show a couple charts that show the science about this. You really don't need to dive too deeply into these charts to get the picture. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change periodically releases scenarios in which they look at different ways that our global carbon emissions could affect our global temperature increase. You can see on this chart, the 2 degrees Celsius line is that tipping point. And the three scenarios shown right now, you can see that our emissions take us well above that 2 degrees Celsius line, at which point climate change would likely spin out of control. Luckily, there's another emission scenario that the IPCC released, and you can see it keeps us below that line, the crucial 2 degrees Celsius line. But what does this mean in terms of our carbon emissions deadlines? These are scenarios that shown that keep us above that 2 degrees Celsius line, the red, yellow, and blue ones. So these are not good scenarios. And this green scenario, which we saw keeps us below this line, actually only gives us a 66% chance of staying below that line. And that would call for emissions to peak in 2020. So post-Paris, the IPCC released a more aggressive emission scenario. And the crux of this one is that it gives us an 85% chance of staying below the 2 degrees Celsius tipping point, which is fantastic, but it means that our global carbon emissions need to peak essentially today, somewhere between 2016 and 2020, and that we have to be at zero carbon emissions as a globe by the year 2050. So the key takeaway from this is that to meet the Paris Climate Agreement, we have to be at zero by 50. Luckily, we have an incredible opportunity within the building sector. Most of you are probably aware of the fact that urban environments emit by far the majority of the world's GHGs, so 75% total. And over the next 35 years, it is projected that we're going to build 2 trillion square feet of new and rebuilt buildings worldwide. It's an astronomical number to kind of give some context to that. That's the equivalent of building an entire New York City, all 5 boroughs, not just Manhattan, an entire New York City every 35 days for 35 years straight. So this massive amount of building stock that's going to be developed in the world. And as most of you are probably aware, a lot of the efforts towards sustainability throughout the last couple decades have been focused heavily on operational carbon and less so on embodied carbon. And so we're looking today at what the projected impacts of the operational versus embodied carbon really are, so we can see how crucial our efforts towards reducing embodied carbon are towards meeting our Paris climate goals. So an interesting and quick way that we can look at the difference between operational and embodied is to take a snapshot of one building. So we'll look at this typical high performance building. So meeting today's 2030 challenge targets, roughly 60–70% reduction from a baseline. You can see that the area under the curve here represents the cumulative amount of carbon emissions. And if this building was constructed in 2015 on day 1 of its life, obviously no emissions have gone into operating it. All of its emissions are embodied emissions or from materials and construction. And if we take that out, the cumulative emissions for a 100-year lifespan of a building, a high performance building in this case, not a traditional building, have us about 40% of the emissions for that building are operations, whereas 60% are materials and construction. But as I said earlier, we are focused really heavily on this 0 by 50, so no carbon by 2050 deadline. And so I think it's crucial that we stop looking at buildings for their whole lifespan and start drawing a line in the sand at that 2050, the year 2050. So what if we look at that same building built in 2015, but essentially say, what if we don't care about the impacts past 2050? The operations represents only about 19% of that building's cumulative carbon emissions, whereas materials and construction represents 81%. And then you can imagine that for buildings built even closer to 2050, so for a building built in 2025, for example, that proportion is going to be even more heavily weighted towards materials and construction. So that's just one building. It's a high performance building, but it's not a net zero building. We can imagine that our building and stock will become increasingly efficient, which means the embodied impacts will actually probably become more impactful than operational impacts than those charts showed. So what if we extrapolate out those estimates from one building and take it to this whole 2 trillion square feet? And again, just drawing that line in the sand at the year 2050. And we assume, this 2 trillion square feet is going to be built relatively proportionately for the next 35 years. What you're looking at is somewhere around 90% of the carbon impact of that 2 trillion square feet will be in building materials, whereas building operations will only be 10% of that impact. And for various reasons, we actually think that this is a fairly conservative estimate in terms of how much building materials will represent the carbon impact of that 2 trillion square feet. So clearly embodied carbon is going to have this huge impact from now till 2050. And it's a tried and true saying, we all know it, you can't manage what you don't measure. So to that end, and to starting to tackle embodied carbon, Architecture 2030 has worked with multiple other organizations to develop whole building embodied carbon baselines, and we have published a preliminary report, and it contains some preliminary findings. And this is great, especially for architects and engineers and other design professionals who want to start tackling embodied carbon in their design work. But What about product category embodied carbon baselines? What about the manufacturing community? We know that some product category embodied carbon baselines exist. James will be here to talk about the efforts NRMCA did, but by and large, this is a huge gap in our knowledge base right now, and a pretty crucial gap if we're going to start reducing the impacts of the embodied carbon of our materials. So just some key takeaways from this. We can't meet Paris Agreement goals without addressing embodied carbon. It is absolutely impossible to do so. And again, just to repeat, you can't manage what you can't measure. Product category baselines are crucial for addressing and reducing embodied carbon. And with that, I will turn it back over to Kim.
Well, Erin, thank you so much. And who remembers the old internet joke? On the internet, anyone can be a dog. We promise Erin's a real person with a dog. So Erin, thank you so much. I have to say, when we were putting this webinar together, the stats that Erin shared with us were pretty shocking, and obviously creates a real sense of urgency. Whether people agree with them or not, there's certainly no doubt that the climate is warming at a considerable pace, and we involved in the built environment are absolutely contributing to it. And there are ways that we can act to reduce those impacts. I'm going to let James introduce himself and tell you about the work that NRMCA did to create their own industry-wide EPD and how they are looking at reducing the environmental impacts of ready-mix concrete.
Hey, thank you very much, Terry. Greatly appreciate it. I'm James Bogdan. I'm with the National Ready-Mix Concrete Association. My participation in today's webinar is to discuss some of the market drivers as well as the process that we went through that led to development of our industry-wide EPD. Now, as the Association for the Ready-Mix Industry, we represent hundreds of members with thousands of concrete plants, as you know, throughout the United States, produce over 70% of the total concrete production used in construction across the United States. Our members span from global publicly traded and vertically integrated organizations to the local family-owned concrete producer. Like any industry association in a competitive construction marketplace, our efforts are to secure our product category in a fair and responsible way. We do that through leadership, education, promotion, and partnering. And my role within NRMCA is really to be a resource and to assist our members to understand the sustainability market trends, such as the green building marketplace and the LEED rating system, so they have a better opportunity to respond to some of those inquiries or drivers that they're realizing in their day-to-day business. Before we go any further, to give you a little understanding of what ready-mix concrete is, there's some confusion, but whenever you add rock, basically, and sand with the binding agent, which is water and cement, you get concrete. Although the ingredients seem pretty basic, there's significant chemistry that goes into designing concrete mixes, and it's all based on its functional use, installation conditions, the long-term environmental exposures, that a ready-mix producer can literally have thousands of mix designs for their concrete products. One thing to note, and we hear this all the time, and it's something to clarify, cement is an ingredient within concrete. Some people use those terms interchangeably as if they're the same thing. They're not. And just to give you an example, is if you're going to a bakery and you want to order cake, but instead you order flour. That's the kind of misconception of concrete and cement. Cement is a very valuable ingredient within concrete. Now, over the years, over the past, say, 20 years, there's been a tremendous shift in how product consumers are selecting products and how manufacturers are marketing them, particularly when it comes to environmental attributes of products. I believe most manufacturers today, they have an understanding, they've realized that marketing environmentally friendly products has moved away from self-declared claims. It's gone past independent third-party certifications to more of a robust and transparent process that one can find within environmental product declarations. And that trend has been accepted and integrated into the LEED V4, the version 4 of the rating system, where LEED 4 has integrated a series of product transparency credits. Within the M&R, the materials and resources category, there are 3 credits that are encouraging product disclosure. And although we're only going to talk about the environmental disclosure credit today, there are 2 other ones that are driving a lot of interest within the manufacturing community. So for the environmental disclosure credit, it has various options to contribute. NRMCA, as emphasized with the red font on the screen, we wanted to position ourselves and help our members to be able to contribute to a variety of options within the environmental disclosure credit. So there's some initiatives we went through, although we're mostly going to talk about the industry average today and have some comment on the last one regarding option 2, demonstrating impact reduction. We've created programs and initiatives that really try to bring our members some value so they can respond in various ways to this particular credit. So from a high level, we conducted an industry-wide EPD. This is a several-year process that it took us from start to finish. We started our research into EPDs really back in February 2011, whenever LEED version 4 was still in draft form and it was open for public comments. Around the same time, and Erin had mentioned it, there was the launch of the Architecture 2030 Product Challenge. So in addition to just general trends of product transparency working their way through various marketplaces, not only just the construction marketplace, but other marketplaces, we now had a couple specific initiatives, LEED, Architecture 2030 Product Challenge, that we believe would influence product disclosure reporting in the future. Around that same time of our research, we were informed that the Carbon Leadership Forum out of the University of Washington was championing the effort to develop the industry's product category rule for concrete. And they were joined by influential and a very proactive ready-mix producer who was considering their own strategy for developing EPDs. So this offered NRMCA an opportunity to join the Carbon Leadership Forum and then work with industry stakeholders to develop the PCR. Being involved in that PCR development and eventually coming to helping with the publication of that product category rule gave us some decent direction and guidance for how we wanted to scope a project of our own, which would be the industry-wide environmental product declaration. Once that PCR became available, we started considering how we're going to engage our industry and encourage them to participate in a project that would allow them to consider contributing to these trends, but also specifically LEED projects. And so these 3 things and 3 challenges that we considered were very important that we try to overcome these to make sure that we can have a successful project. And these include how we're going to scope the project, how we're going to get member buy-in and approval for us to move forward with this project, and how we're going to ensure confidence and confidentiality in the process, because with the process there does require collecting a lot of specific and sensitive information from our members. And so from a perspective of the scoping, with the activities around developing the PCR, we had some insight into scoping the project. However, we needed to determine what type of products that we wanted to include into the scope. And this required member engagement to determine how many concrete mixes, what would be a good select of concrete mixes that will provide us the widest range of coverage for both products as well as U.S. coverage for construction projects. And once the project was scoped and the mix is determined, this led us, like any process, led into a development of an RFP and sending it to LCA and EPD practitioners for their bids, and then eventually trying to fine-tune that scope once a consultant was finally selected. From a member engagement perspective, we have industry meetings twice a year, sometimes more, and that allows us to get in front of our members. We would utilize these meetings to educate our industry, to talk about product disclosure trends, why members should consider participating, trends in the future that they may be subject to, and we'd also In addition to those face-to-face meetings, we'd also send out various communications per our internal process, such as weekly web news, articles. We'd send email campaigns talking about trends in the industry to our members and other stakeholders. That would also discuss EPDs, or even hosted several webinars to our membership explaining the EPD process and how we wanted to move forward to consider industry-wide average. And then finally, from a confidentiality perspective, one big concern is that to develop an industry-wide or any EPD is that there's a requirement to collect operations data. And we need to assure our members that it was going to be a confidential process. Some may think concrete is concrete, or paint is paint, or glass is glass, but to that manufacturer, they believe they have a specific and unique formula that provides the performance that they're trying to market into the construction marketplace. So it's a very sensitive approach, trying to get that information out of a manufacturer, because it leads to sensitive information about their operations in the data that you would collect from their operations. And some of that data that's needed to develop the EPD are things like ingredient sources, transportation distances to their site from their suppliers, the resources that are used to manufacture the product, how much energy and what type of energy was utilized and consumed during the manufacturing, how much water was used. And from all that, there's emissions, there's discharges, there's effluents, there's waste that's being generated from the manufacturing process. And can we have that information? Because eventually, you need to aggregate all that information to determine what the environmental impacts from manufacturing is. But this specific, plant operation data, it's very confidential. And so for us, in scoping our project, we were able to rely on our consultant that would handle that and really keep us separate from the process, because it's very important that we had some objectivity to the process, and we wouldn't have any specific knowledge of the process. Okay, so with the process considered, really it followed this path. The flow of data was originated by a survey developed by the consultant. The survey, which was basically an Excel spreadsheet, contained all the necessary criteria to collect the plant operations data. The survey was delivered to each of the ready-mix producers, also known as the participants into the industry-wide project. As a note for statistical confidence, not every participating plant had to submit operations data. However, every participating company had to submit data to be considered a participant in this process. We didn't have to have 100% coverage, because we found that there is some consistencies in the manufacturing process that we didn't have to have 100% operations data. The ready-mix producer would upload all their ops data to a website that was managed by the consultant. The consultant would review that data and reconcile any gaps that they would identify. They would take that information and, utilizing life cycle analysis methodology, they would aggregate the environmental impacts for the various product mixes. And afterwards, the consultant would develop the draft EPD. And then with that draft EPD, accompanied by the LCA report, we then submit that to another independent practitioner who would go through the verification of that data to make sure the report, as well as the EPD, was in accordance with the product category rule. And after that went through the process, it was published and made available to all participating companies. And once again, that process, we were not privy to all that information. We more or less held a logistical role, making sure meetings were established and make sure everybody was receiving their information to go through the verification process, but we do not handle any of the data. And what became of that was the product. The product was our industry-wide EPD. We first published it in 2014 under version 1. And that document reported the environmental impacts of the most commonly specified mix designs that serve the largest number of distinct product functions and applications. Our industry-wide EPD is representative of about 95% of all mixes that can be found in construction documents that are specified for construction. The industry-wide EPD, we had great benefit from the producers who participate in it, a significant number of them, as well as over 2,000 plants had participated in that process. It gives us very good coverage and gives the marketplace very good coverage across the U.S. that a participating company would be able to submit some kind of contribution to a lead project utilizing this document in almost every place within the United States. After the version 1 was launched, we had a lot of member interest who didn't participate in version 1 that wanted to go through the same process. So in 2016, we went through the same exact process as we did in 2013, 14, to make sure that we can capture even more companies' participation. So that document, which was published at the end of 2016, added some mixed designs that wasn't captured in version 1, but it was more about adding companies in concrete plants. And now we're up over 2,500 and close to 90 companies that are producing, that provided information that can be participating companies in the industry-wide. Now, from us, there's many perspectives, and we talked about some of the market drivers, why we want to do this and to try to create value for our members. But at the same time, we have another perspective, is that it was important to deliver the industry-wide EPD as a means to encourage our members to participate in a project that didn't publicly disclose sensitive operations data. It allowed the industry to understand and follow a low-risk path to understand the PCR, the inventories, collecting the inventory of the ops data, going through the LCA process, the EPD process, without them committing significant resources to the process. This was all free to them. This was an expense incurred by our association to try to position them as a leading product category in the marketplace. And eventually providing opportunities to contribute to a lead version 4 project once lead version 4 came up and started hitting the marketplace. Equally important was that smaller organizations, having them had the opportunity to participate in this process, and where they may not have the resources to do this themselves or create their own environmental product declarations, provided them some opportunity, whether they had restrictions of financial or staff capacity. Participating in this gave them the same opportunity as other companies, larger companies, to respond to lead inquiries. And so what the industry-wide EPD does and what it looks like, basically it reports all the averages of the environmental impacts for various mixed designs. For a company who participated in the industry-wide EPD, they can respond to a lead inquiry for their product. They would align their product code. They would align it with the equivalent product code of the industry-wide EPD, and then they would reference the various environmental impacts of that mix. So therefore, a participating company can utilize the industry-wide EPD as a proxy for their product and demonstrate contribution to a lead V4 project. Other than the industry-wide EPD, we know that we had to develop some other resources to help our industry understand how to utilize that report and utilize that information. So this is all publicly available information. It's on our website. The EPD is publicly available, but on our website, we have additional resources, directory of the participants, whether a PDF form or a searchable directory. We have recorded webinars and accompanying slide decks with instructions on how to utilize the industry-wide EPD, as well as a sample letter that a producer who participated in the process would be able to demonstrate their contribution to a lead project. And then finally, while we were conducting and developing the industry-wide EPD, we also completed a regional benchmark report. And what this report did, it basically consisted of taking all the industry-wide EPD and mining that data into an average concrete mix per strength category for various regions of the United States. This served as the mix benchmark for that region. And so for those organizations that had a product-specific or a company-specific EPD, they would be able to utilize their EPD, compare it to the regional benchmark of their region, then compare the environmental impacts with the goal, hopefully, of reporting a lower environmental footprint. So the manufacturer and the producer of the concrete has the resources. If they have the resources to do an EPD, now they can conduct a comparison to the benchmark and allow them to contribute to that second option of the credit mentioned earlier, which is optimization and impact reduction. And thank you. Terry, back to you.
Thank you, James. That was a phenomenal example of work done over the course of the last 4 years. Is that right, James? You started in 2013, or was it before that?
From research starting in 2011,
Right.
February 2011, but it's still an ongoing process because we've got to make sure that EPD is still reflective of current needs in the industry.
Right. So that is a tremendous body of work, and I'm going to call that a Cadillac project. And, you know, not only is it comprehensive and ongoing, the key point is that they did it from scratch. I mean, they had to do the PCR, they had to recruit the participants, they had to figure out how to collect the data and keep it confidential and get it to the LCA provider. I mean, they figured everything out and did it themselves, and, you know, really brought a lot of value, which is what industry organizations do for their members, is bring them value. And so coming back to the Program Operator Consortium, you know, our goal is, let's not make every industry organization do it from scratch, because it's hard and it takes a long time. There's a lot that James talked about that they did that is now kind of packaged into having a standardized PCR creation process, and now a standardized benchmarking process, and ultimately to get to this goal of creating a deliverable that allows people to make better informed decisions. And I mentioned earlier that really the PCR and LCA are all in service to delivering the EPD, because it's that document that is used to make decisions. And so, you know, all that time that James spent explaining PCR creation, LCA evaluation, et cetera, you know, it was all tidily ultimately delivered in different forms of EPDs. And so this process is designed to streamline that whole front end, also reduce the cost, and create standardized reports. And frankly, those reports can take on any format. They can be in PDF, they can be in the cloud, they can be color, not color, pictures, no pictures. But what Part A, the piece of the framework, the consortium is aligning around, what it describes is not only the LCA calculation rules and how those get done for any LCA, it also describes in Appendix C the content requirements for a Type 3 environmental declaration. Now, Sustainable Mines, when we got involved and became a program operator 4 years ago, we were focused on that deliverable. How do we make a deliverable that helps non-technical people make better informed decisions, particularly on the path to comparability? So in Appendix C of Part A, it goes through the sections required by ISO 14025 for content in a Type 3 environmental declaration, and it's very specific about exactly the content required, with a really sharpened pencil on how much of the LCA information needs to go into a market-facing document, particularly when a version of the LCA itself is made publicly available. Remember, an EPD is a report of an LCA report. And so we have really been guardians of, don't put so much LCA data into the market-facing document that nobody can find the content they need to actually make a comparative and informed decision. So our brand of Type 3 environmental declaration, we call it a transparency report. It's delivered in the cloud. It's 3 pages. And I'm setting this up because Kim is going to show you the content components and how comparability can be added to any format. We'll use ours as the example, but any format this can be applied to. Now, we've talked about Part A. The Part B in the Sustainable Minds framework is done at the product group level, and we've picked up on that in the benchmarking because product groups are defined by the functional performance the product delivers, which drives all of the measurement in the LCA. There's a very simple Part B creation form that the PCR groups use, so all of the things that need to be considered get considered and simply compiled into what turns out to be less than a 2-page set of requirements. And so that partners with a Part A to create a complete PCR. Again, this is the technical advisory board that Sustainable Minds started several years ago. And when we created the consortium, every member of the consortium then identified a representative to represent their interests in creating a harmonized set of tools available for all of us to use at their convenience. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim, who is an LCA analyst and also the Transparency Report Program Coordinator and manages the tab, who will now give you the overview of the new benchmarking guidance. Take it away, Kim.
Thanks, Terry. Thanks for the intro. We'll be talking about Program Operator Consortium, PCR, and EPD development. Our goal to standardize how we earn the EPD optimization credit and the benchmarking guidance we've been working on to accomplish that. So I'll talk about its content, how it can be used with Part B to create an industry-wide EPD, and we'll look at what a product-specific report looks like and how that can transform into a comparative report. And then I'll show you how you can comment on the guidance. As many of you know, the intent is that the Program Operator Consortium members use standardized PCR creation process. And so our objective in creating this benchmarking guidance is in order to create product group benchmarks so that each manufacturer can use them to compare and demonstrate business advantage and differentiation to make achievable the LEED version 4 MR EPD credit for optimization by comparing product-specific EPDs to the industry-wide EPD, and to set goals for improvement over time by reducing the greatest impacts across all impact categories by life cycle stage. In creating this benchmarking guidance, we looked at current industry-wide EPDs and also the part of USGBC guidance, which gave some more information on benchmarking. As James talked about, the LEED version 4 language for environmental product declarations provides 2 options. So the option 1 is for having the EPD, and then option 2 provides 1 point for demonstrating impact reduction below the industry average. The LEED language here isn't very well defined, as it doesn't quantify impact reduction and it doesn't define what the industry average is. The content of this guidance includes rules about how to establish an industry-wide EPD. So it has to be for 1 product group. There must be at least 3 participants representing at least 50% of the industry. And those participants specify the required impact categories, the data use requirements, and the LCIA method and version number. The guidance also describes who can compare their EPDs to the industry-wide EPD. And then for making comparisons, the product-specific EPD and industry-wide EPD must declare the same modules, compare the same facilities and LCIA method, and show improvement based on the quantitative uncertainty of the industry-wide results, since the industry is likely to change depending on the product or the industry. We wanted users of the guidance to be able to use it regardless of whether there was already a PCR for their product group. So whether you're creating a new Part B or using an existing PCR, you can create what we're calling the benchmarking addendum that has all of the additional rules required for benchmarking. So this introduces a standard process for creating industry-wide EPDs, which will all contain the same content, in addition to the program's regular EPD content requirements, including the LCIA method and version number, the number of participants and total market share of the group, a comparison limitation statement, a description of the quantitative uncertainty of the results, which is important for defining improvement, and then also industry goals for improvement based on common significant contributors to the impact categories. So for verification, industry-wide EPDs get verified similarly to a product-specific EPD, so verification costs should be comparable. This guidance explains how to set goals for improvement for your industry based on where the greatest impacts are across all impact categories, not just carbon footprint. Similar to the goals set by Architecture 2030, these goals are meant to be industry specific, and the reduction targets are meant to be impact category specific. You can make 2 or 3 recommendations based on the largest contributors to the most important impact categories for your industry, based on an assessment of materiality and operational reduction or new product design. These recommendations can be quantitative or qualitative, depending on what your industry thinks is best. So to summarize, we want each industry to ask, where are the impacts and how do we set improvement goals around that? So this also introduces a standard process for creating comparisons of product-specific results to the benchmark. So the comparisons will showcase the industry-wide and product-specific EPD results side by side, with the % improvement or reduction in each impact category based on uncertainty. So if all your results are below or within that threshold for uncertainty, your product will be considered equivalent to the benchmark. So then the graphs compare the 2 highest and lowest performing impact categories relative to that benchmark, but it's not enough to show data side by side. So we're requiring the manufacturers to explain the relative environmental performance shown in the results in the graphs, and then what they're doing to achieve the performance. So now I'll take you through page 2 of a product-specific transparency report, or version of an EPD, so that later I can show you how it can be transformed into a comparative version. So as you can see in the left column, right away you can see the scope and the summary, including the functional unit and the default scenarios, followed by the material composition and the total impacts by life cycle stage. Then in the right column, you can read about what's causing the greatest impacts for all life cycle stages. And then it zooms in on the most impactful life cycle stage. And we already have in place this green box to talk about what the manufacturer is already doing to improve the environmental performance of their products. Here we can see the life cycle stages and the which modules are included and excluded, followed by the single score results for each life cycle stage. And then finally, we have the Tracy results for each impact category, and then the references section with this box showing the value of this document in different rating systems. Now I'll show you how to make the comparison more understandable. So we'll include a comparative table of results, the graphs showing the comparisons for the key impact categories, interpretation of the environmental performance relative to the benchmark, what the manufacturer is doing to address the goals set in the industry-wide EPD, links to the industry-wide EPD in the LCA, and the rating systems box with that lead optimization credit. So the comparative results are reported for each impact category by life cycle stage. So if we zoom in, you can see that the industry-wide and product-specific results are presented side by side with the % improvement or reduction right there in the table, with the LCA background report and industry-wide EPD linked in the references section. The total impacts of the highest and lowest performing impact categories are represented as graphs, where you can easily see the improvement and reduction for the most affected impact categories. And perhaps most importantly, the interpretation section explains why your product is different compared to the benchmark, explains which materials and processes contribute to the difference in results for the most affected impact categories, and addresses the uncertainty associated with them. In this green box, we show that the manufacturer, what the manufacturer is doing to improve relative to the improvement recommendations described in the industry-wide EPD. And then in the rating system section, this is what it would look like if that multi-attribute optimization point was earned for lead version 4. So the public comment period for the guidance starts today and lasts 1 month. There are some areas I want to highlight for your feedback. So for the validity period of the industry-wide EPD, and then how frequently it gets updated, the intent and what the industry needs is a benchmark that's kept current, but there needs to be a consistent benchmark for some period of time because LCAs take such a long time to do, and you can't be moving the finish line all the time. We don't want the large administrative load from doing that to be from having to continuously update and maintain it, because that's a lot to work with. And then you can see who can use the industry-wide EPD to make comparisons. So the options on the table right now are either only the original participants or any manufacturer who did not explicitly decline to participate in the original industry-wide EPD. Because we want to encourage every manufacturer who's doing a product-specific EPD to be able to compare to the benchmark. So to that end, if they weren't able to participate, then by using the data to compare, they're committing to contribute their data in the next update. Then I also want feedback on the idea of tracking industry-wide EPDs on the Program Operator Consortium website, including who contributed and who's pledging to participate in the next update. So to summarize, what we're trying to do is standardize a way to create industry-wide EPDs to use as credible benchmarks to compare to. We want to help the industry set improvement goals by reducing their greatest impacts and enable every manufacturer to compare so that they can create lots of comparative EPDs, which will enable AUCs to earn the lead optimization credit. And then the reason we're doing all of this is ultimately to help manufacturers make better products that reduce impacts on the environment. So here's how to comment. You can go to the Program Operator Consortium website in the News and Events section and download the guidance and the comments spreadsheet, and then fill it out and send it back to tab@sustainableminescom by August 18th. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. That was really a great, concise presentation of what clearly has been a lot of work and a lot of thought put into it by a lot of people. And now we really want everyone who made time to attend this webinar, and even more broadly, let's take a look at the ideas that are on the table. You know, nothing is cast in stone or cement. It really is about engaging the industry. We've put out kind of the areas that really need a little bit more feedback and consideration. When you go to the Program Operator website to get the guidance in the News and Events section, you can certainly take a look at the North American PCR catalog, which we've created to track all of the PCRs that are current and expiring. It's updated every month. You can see the last update was July 3rd. And you can also see by CSI master format, if this were the live page, you could scroll down. There are not actually a lot of PCRs relative to all of the CSI master format divisions. And certainly once you get into the section level, there really aren't a lot of PCRs for all of the reporting that needs to be done. So, you know, that's a reason why we've tried to create a standardized and more streamlined process to encourage more PCR creation. You'll find a link to the Sustainable Mines Transparency Catalog, where all brands who are creating products with transparency information are represented. In the next 2 weeks, we'll be adding all the manufacturers who have participated in industry-wide EPDs, all of the trade associations who have led those projects are already represented in the catalog, but all of their members will also be added. And when you're a customer of any of the Program Operator Consortium members, your company gets a freemium listing that links to your website, links to your EPDs, and allows users to contact you. Please consider becoming an affiliate member. The consortium is designed to bring together industry organizations, people who work in government agencies, data providers, standards developers, and consultants who work in this space. The benefits today are discounted rates for working with members, access to a like-minded community, which is really, giving everyone a seat at the table, and a structure in which to participate, education on product transparency, and contributing to creating uniformity across environmental reporting, data requirements, and communication. So to wrap up, you have a choice of program operators and programs, and the difference between them is the rules. Understanding the rules of the programs you're considering using is really how you should be making a decision. No one owns the PCR. When it expires, it can be renewed in any program. At the end of the day, remember, the PCR and the LCA are in service to delivering the report. The report, in whatever format it's in, needs to be standardized, straightforward, simple, and ultimately comparative. So we invite all of you to be a proponent of simplification and standardization, to deliver more useful and valuable environmental reporting tools to the marketplace. Manufacturers, we invite you to create new or renew an expiring PCR with a consortium member. Industry organizations, we invite you to start an industry-wide EPD project. And program operators, we welcome any active program operator to join the consortium to standardize the industry. I want to thank you all for attending today. You can contact us through the consortium website, browse around, you can learn about our aligned model and the resources we have available. And we look forward to lots of feedback on the benchmarking guidance, and we'll get that published early in the fall. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.